Yo boys, Rev here, and today we're going to be going over New World Eternum's Season 10 Nighthaven update. The dev video just came out and I had an opportunity to just watch it all the way through. It was really extensive and pretty detailed with what they're releasing. Very excited about it, a lot of things to go through, so we're going to be talking about some of those things today and why it's going to be bringing me back for Season 10. So hopefully get you guys excited. Let's hop right in.
You may try to defeat the darkness, but you cannot escape the night.
To just briefly go over some of the things with you guys, with some of the stuff they're bringing in for Season 10, they are increasing the level cap, they are increasing the gear score cap, they're doing a whole overhaul of the attribute system, weapon scaling overhaul. They're doing some gear rework as well between perks and set bonuses. Yes, there are going to be sets in this update as well, infixes and much more. Obviously, they're bringing an entire new zone, which they claim is the biggest zone they've made to date. Over 40 new mob types, new replayable PvE content with Catacombs, a lot of balance changes to the game. They've added in-game rare rewards that you can trade and or sell. And obviously previously with the update that they had back at the start of summer, that was more of a PvP oriented update. I myself am an avid PvPer of New World. I really enjoy it. I think it's one of the best combat systems that I've played in any MMO, and I will stand on that. But with that, coupled with, you know, a new OPR map coming out for Nighthaven and focusing on the verticality with the jump platforms, if you guys have played the Capture the Flag mode they just released, there's a lot of great things coming. So lots to go over today. Let's do it. I think one important thing to note of why I'm also looking to make a comeback for Season 10 outside of just the content they're bringing. This is kind of on topic, off topic, but obviously we know, for those of you being kind of in the loop, a lot of the leadership on the dev team has shifted, where Katie, that used to work under Scott, now is overseeing, I think, the whole game. As far as I know, she is the game director. And so people are kind of correlating, well, ever since she's kind of taken over, it has now really, the game has really seen a lot of positive comeback, and you know, the players are getting the updates they've been wanting. I've been wanting for years now, and it's been a really refreshing experience to kind of just see them implement these things, and even more refreshing experience to see the positive feedback that New World's been getting over the last 4, 5, 6 months. So, you know, I think it adds a whole new element of a promising future for New World, and so we'll see what happens. Something that got me kind of hyped about the Nighthaven Zone was the lead designer, David McKenzie. He's the one that worked on Nighthaven, but he also had worked previously on Brimstone. Now, I don't know about you guys, but I actually really enjoy Brimstone. I think it's probably one of the coolest, most aesthetically pleasing zones in the game. I'm pretty sure my recall is there on like 2 of my characters. So I really like that zone. I'm excited to see what he does for Nighthaven. And in the video, he had mentioned that Nighthaven is quite literally the polar opposite of Brimstone, where Brimstone's very, I think he said, horizontal, a lot of horizontal vasts. It's very open, whereas Nighthaven, it's a little bit more dense with a lot of the pine trees. It's obviously dark. If you notice, there has been a lot of focus with the verticality that they're bringing to Nighthaven, not just with the zones themselves or some of the buildings like the castles, but a lot of the mechanics and gimmicks that they mentioned as well, which we'll talk about that more. But I think it's just going to add a little bit of a different focus and dynamic to the game, and I think it's going to make it a much more lively experience overall. There is a small section in the video where they talk about a lot of the hidden things they added to New World, some of the gimmicks we've talked about. So what they say gimmicks are is basically anything where the player kind of interacts with the world. And so I also kind of will take it a step further. Like, as you guys know, if you guys have played New World, there are those little like puzzles and things, or climbing up a POI somewhere in a different zone. And it kind of just makes you think, adds a little bit of strategy or thinking to whatever you're doing. And obviously we can just go to Google and find it, or YouTube and find it. But I personally enjoy those things. I think they're really fun to add in a lot of games. I mean, and back in the day, you'd see it in like, I don't know, Knights of the Old Republic or something. And obviously more modern games like Elden Ring, for example, you know, they'll have those little puzzles on the side that you have to kind of sit there and figure out. And I personally like to see those kind of things in games, mainly just because it just kind of strays away from just this linear way of how we play games, from just how fast can I get from point A to point B, and adds a little fun little element to that stuff. And we'll talk about the tarot cards here in a little bit, but you know, I think there's a lot of really cool gimmicks adding to it, and I think it's going to add, again, more dynamic to the game. And speaking of the verticality thing that we talked about previously, one of the gimmicks they had mentioned was, and kind of I guess how it started this whole like vertical-esque type way of going about designing Season 10, is they were talking about a chandelier mechanic, and how, you know, there's stuff above you, and if you can shoot it or do something to it where it can land on a mob, which is, you know, obviously would help you, or if you don't and you walk under it, it can land on you. And so there's a con to not, you know, paying attention, I guess, above you. So I do think that I'm excited to see how that kind of pans out.
We have these spider caves that are scary, honestly, especially if you have arachnophobia.
They literally make our coworkers' skin crawl.
A bit.
Okay. So I hate spiders. Not a spider guy. Had arachnophobia for a long time. Probably still have it now, even though I don't want to admit it. Not really looking forward to the dark, creepy dungeon full of spiders. But I got the boys with me, so I'm locked in. Now, though they talked about a lot of the stuff above the ground, they did talk a little bit about the underworld stuff, the underground stuff, and some of the things. There's some POIs around the world or around Nighthaven that you can go to these areas, and they have like things you can loot, and there's little zones that you kind of go through. They mentioned within these underworld zones, they added things like, you know, very heavy dark fog, which limits your vision. And then, you know, through that, I guess some, you know, shadow enemies will come out, and which I think they call them nightmares. And I really think this is also another really fun thing they're adding to the game. I'm excited to test it out and see how, you know, how it pans out, how it plays out. But I love just those areas. It kind of just adds that level of immersion, which adds, again, another fun dynamic that I think that is moving the game in the right direction. One of the things that they're going to be looking to bring back for Nighthaven that they had in Brimstone was the ancient glyph system. You know, you get the ancient glyphs and you're able to open certain chests, go to certain locations, etc. They're going to be doing a very similar system with Arcana and the tarot cards, and having the tarot towers be able to go through and unlock certain things. And basically collecting these cards will allow you to, you know, reach certain areas, do certain puzzles throughout Nighthaven, unlock certain elite chests, etc. So although I didn't really personally care too much for it, I am excited to see, you know, how they implement the system and some of the puzzles and rewards they're going to be giving for doing a lot of these things. And so I will be participating and trying to collect as many of those as I can, just to kind of really insert myself and really give the system a shot. Now, if you're an OG New World player, you guys know that swimming has always been a relatively big pain point for New World for a lot of players. Now they've actually implemented the swimming mechanic in the game, so you can swim, but it seems that they're doubling down for Nighthaven by adding a lot of swimming puzzles and things and discovery elements throughout the Nighthaven Zone, excuse me. I think they're just kind of doubling down on having more swimming mechanics and swimming objectives in the game, which I think just by adding that in as well. I've personally never been a fan of swimming stuff in MMOs. They just feel clunky and weird, but I am excited to give it a shot and see how it unfolds in New World. If this tickles your fancy, great. One thing that they did go a little bit in depth of was the characters of Nighthaven. I think there was like 4 or 5 like main characters that are kind of throughout between each faction and how they kind of interact with each other. To be honest with you, I won't go too much in depth with this. If you're a big lore person and want to learn about these characters, like, feel free to go watch the video, maybe do a little bit more digging. I do think some of the artwork and some of the characters and what they're doing is pretty cool. Again, I'm not a big lore guy, but regardless, I do think it's cool. It's going to add to the story. Creatures and mob types. So they had mentioned in the video that they are introducing around 40-ish new creatures and mobs, which I do think is great in my opinion. I've always felt like New World in general has always kind of lacked mob type variations. There only seems to be like a few different types, and so I think adding more of those into the game is just going to add to a more fun element in just fighting these mobs. And so to kind of go over this very briefly, I think it's the Upier, I think they say it's the vampires. They're adding up to 10 new designs for these vampires with new abilities and things like that. The Burlar, which are the were-beasts, werewolves, were-bears, were-ravens. They're adding the Inquisitors, which sounds like it's an extended version of the Corrupted, which is some of the original mobs that they had in New World. And I think of those, there's about 6 characters / types that kind of fill that Inquisitor clan, if you will. Cleric, Flamekeeper, the Warden / Enforcer, and the Markswoman and the Seraph. And then kind of a bonus mob type, I guess, is part of the Lost family, which is they call like the ghastly horrors. So some of them can be headless and they're more like horror driven, which I think is pretty cool. Excited to fight some of those mobs. And then lastly, like the wildlife. So obviously spiders, rats, foxes, reindeer, etc. They've added 4 new main story quest bosses that we'll be able to fight, and then 4 additional post main story quest challenge bosses as well. So excited to fight a lot of these mobs. Basically, I'm excited to fight these mobs. I'm excited to see some of the mechanics, some of the new stuff. They do drive a lot of inspiration from these mobs and their abilities, and they kind of implement them for us to use down the road. So I'm excited to see what those mobs do. Okay, so the raid. Now, from what we understand, the raid for Nighthaven is going to be very similar to the Hive of Gorgons raid that came out. I personally thought the Hive of Gorgons raid was a pretty cool raid overall. I like the mechanics. I like some of the boss fights. You know, you have to have a level of coordination and strategy with your raid group. It wasn't just kind of face roll for the most part. Obviously, you had your little puzzles in there too, which I thought was pretty cool as well. And so it sounds like they're going to be doing something very similar for Nighthaven. There's going to be one prolonged puzzle instead of like 3 mini ones like Hive of Gorgons had. So it's going to be more, I guess, building upon that puzzle, it sounds like, or just continuing the same one. But there's going to be a twist of randomization, which is something they're going to be doing not just for the raid, but for Catacombs, which we'll touch on here shortly. And they kind of go through this really cool video of, I think, the first boss, which is the Jester, and just seeing how the boss kind of enters. It just gives me these like Elden Ring vibes, and I actually love it. I'm excited to just fight these bosses, and I think they're just really cool. I don't know, dude. I think I've never been this excited for PvE, especially New World. So run it up.
One thing I can calmly agree with Chad is, unlike, well, our typical expeditions or raid, this one, you'll definitely need at least 2 Shotcallers.
Yeah, there's a lot going on in these fights.
2 Shotcallers, you say? Rev Shotcalling coming back 2025. You know what I'm saying? Last 15 seconds, we spam crouch, we stop attacking, we teabag.
These are the comms that I came for.
That is the best thing ever.
Everyone spam your teabag, spam your teabag, spam your teabags.
Just crouch.
Stop attacking, stop attacking, and just teabag.
teabag.
Catacombs. So I'm not gonna go super in depth with it. I actually thought it was really interesting of how they designed Catacombs, and they talked more about the technical side of things and how they came up with it. But in general, from a player standpoint, I'm very excited about Catacombs. I think one of the things New World lacks in general is just replayable endgame content, period. And this adds another element of replayable endgame content. So I also think that the way that they are going about it is actually pretty interesting as well, where a lot of it's going to be randomized, and it gives me, the first thing I thought of is very similar to like how Diablo 2 Lord of Destruction, for any of my D2 players out there, and when you're doing MF runs for like Mephisto, or for example, and you know, even though we use things like map hack and other things like that, you know, you still have to kind of search around for whatever, you know, to zone to the next level. And I do think it's giving very similar vibes to that, which I think is really cool, because I think that you kind of stray away from, I really think randomization for things moving forward in games is going to be kind of this hidden tech for a lot of that stuff, because obviously I think we can all collectively agree, even as a content creator influencer myself, it really hurts MMOs when you're making guides for how to do things as fast as possible, and you kind of just X-nay all the other stuff. And so by adding the randomization into it, you're kind of forced to kind of play through it. You can't, there's only so much information that you could apply, but at the end of the day, you still got to do it, right? So I do think that Catacombs is such a great addition to this season. I'm very excited. I think having it be 3 people is honestly even more exciting, just to get some of the boys together and run up a comp and just see how far you can push. So I just think any dungeon crawler like that's really good for the game, especially like MMOs. You know, I do think that the workflows of creating random and procedural content, I think is, random and procedural content is just going to be very beneficial. The randomness, is great as well. Now, going over Catacombs more in detail, outside of the fact that it's replayable endgame content, like we've mentioned, it is 3 players, which I kind of prefer, honestly, just smaller scale stuff to get a couple of the boys together, run through a dungeon crawl, see how far you can push it. It's always great content. The extraction has about a 30-minute timer, and there are aspects and power-ups in these Catacombs, about 18 in total. They mentioned one of the examples they talked about was aspect of Paladin, which, for example, if you're a DPS, you can heal off damage dealt, which I think is really cool. So you can kind of switch up a little bit of the dynamic of your composition, if you will, while you're in the extraction, or the catacomb rather. They're also putting in Ascensions. So Ascensions is, from what I understand, is if when you defeat a boss, you basically just get a power up for your characters, for your party. It's a 10%, I think they mentioned, health and damage increase. Obviously, as you defeat each boss and proceed further into the catacombs, each level, the bosses will get harder significantly. And so it's kind of just to help balance that out a little bit, which I think is awesome. Each catacomb run, I think they mentioned there's 6 potential bosses, and the rewards obviously get better as you defeat each boss and proceed further into the catacomb. One of my favorite things I think is really cool about it, which about Catacombs in particular, is just, and they talk about it more in depth, so if you guys want to learn about it, you feel free to go watch the video, but it's just the randomness and the dynamic and the choices of, allowing players to kind of essentially choose how you want to proceed through the catacomb dungeon based on how far you can make it, your composition, etc. And I think just giving the players these choices and the randomness and switching it up, I think will just add so much more fun which just add a whole new fun factor to just doing Catacombs. So again, I'm excited for it, and we'll see how it goes. Season Pass. So to kind of touch on the Season Pass very briefly, this Season Pass coming out for S10 is supposed to be pretty good, better than previous ones. For example, for S10, they're releasing the Season Pass with 4 potential armor sets that you can get, where previous passes you would only been able to get 2. They're also bringing back mounts in the Season Pass as well. So as you can see here, the Fox mount is one of the mounts you can get from the Season Pass. And then here are 2 images they release of some of the armor sets that you'll be able to get in the Season Pass, which I actually am very excited about. I'm really happy they are finally releasing like cooler transmog cosmetic stuff. I've always felt historically his New World has just not been very good in that department, considering a lot of the other MMOs and what you're able to do in those games. I'm really excited that they're leaning into just having cooler transmogs and cosmetics and armor sets for our characters. Gearing, gear score, gear. Okay, so lots to touch on here. I got some notes to go over with you guys, but I do think what they are doing to the game overall is honestly extremely beneficial for New World in its entirety. So to briefly go through this, any armor, weapons, and or jewelry that is 700 gear score or higher, so the stuff that we have now, can be upgraded with the Underworld system, and they're kind of reworking that a little bit, but essentially if it's at least 700 gear score, you can level that up, which is awesome. What that does, and they've mentioned it, was it basically makes it so the gear, I mean, historically New World, every time they come with an expansion or a major update or increase the gear score, essentially every piece of gear prior to that is obsolete. And I think this is their way of kind of bridging that gap, where the gear that we are going into Nighthaven with, it's still going to be able to be used, especially if it's a good piece of gear, has good perks, etc. And so I actually think that's a really good way of kind of bridging that gap, so it doesn't just completely obsolete everything previous to it. You are able to still bring some of those pieces into Season 10, which I think is cool. So that's a huge one there. Umbral shards. So we will be capped on a weekly basis to be able to obtain a certain amount of umbrals per week. The cost of upgrading your gear and your items will be exponential. So for example, the higher the gear score is, the more umbrals it will cost. And so based on your cap, especially early on, because we only have a finite amount, I think over time you'll still be able to just upgrade pieces of gear at will. But as we're having to, start this off, there's going to be that initial kind of gatekeep, if you will. So it's very important to kind of figure out, okay, what pieces do I want to upgrade? Whether I want to go all the way to 800 because it's going to cost more, or maybe level it to 790, and that will just be good enough for the time being until something better comes along. So it'll add some of the element to a lot of that gear, but I do think the Underworld system is much better used for this. Perk Charms. So Perk Charms are essentially these craftable Perk Charms, quite literally, and they can be offensive, defensive perks, utility perks. This just adds a lot more customization. They had mentioned too, especially that way it just gives us so much more flexibility in our ability to create the pieces of gear that we want and we want to use. And certain items can have up to 4 sockets. Side note, you can only get 4 socket items from M3, so hard content. Everything else in terms of crafting and what you can obtain otherwise can be up to 3 sockets. So I'm assuming there's going to be a lot of people who are going to be wanting to sweat it out to get those 4 socket items for their gear. I myself, I'm going to be one of those people that's going to shoot for that. And so I do think that's going to be a huge thing. But going back to the Perk Charms, I do think just adding that level of flexibility into our gear is huge. So it just adds more customization to how we want to make our builds, which is great. Okay, so tier sets. One of the things that New World is going to be bringing in for Season 10 into the game are tier sets. Very excited about that. I'm excited to see how it kind of plays with those infixes and mix and matching sets, etc. To be very honest, I think a lot of the tier set stuff is very similar to how we've played other games in the past, being able to just obviously get your set bonuses, be able to mix and match certain set bonuses. One thing that I did hear and read when I was watching the video was you cannot have similar infixes and kind of stacking it, if you will. So I don't know how apparent that will be. I don't know how problematic that will be, but that is something that I thought was interesting. So just keep that in mind as you're trying to figure out which infixes you're going for, making sure that they obviously that are compatible. But you'll essentially kind of have to choose. Speaking of infixes and tier sets, another in the gear, we'll just kind of keep it going. So artifacts. One of the things that they're changing about artifacts is that they are upgrading some of the artifacts that had infixes that were, I'll be honest, kind of bad. I forgot what they talked about. They talked about the one where you can't like be moved. And unfortunately, there were just a lot of really cool artifacts in the game in New World previously that I thought were really cool, or at least the thought of it was cool. But realistically, it's like, how often that are you really going to use that, right? And it kind of just makes the whole item obsolete, which really, really sucks. And so I think to improve a lot of the viability for artifacts, they are updating a lot of these artifacts with just updated abilities or just adding more to it to make them a little bit more viable, which I think is great for the game. I've always thought that having a piece of gear and just because it doesn't have that one perk or that one thing, it just sucks. And so I really want there to be an opportunity to be able to turn these somewhat mediocre or completely useless artifacts into something more usable. For Nighthaven, they are introducing a new Heartrune as well, called Phantom Blades. Now, from what I understand or what they said in the video, the Phantom Blades is a ability from a mob that is in New World right now. They basically, what you'll be able to do is put red swords that spin where they're placed and they do damage. And they started talking about some of the upgraded variations of the Heartrune, and the one that I was really excited for, it applies, I think this is a new perk called Sluggish, or a new debuff called Sluggish. If you hit an enemy with the swords, it will apply Sluggish, which prevents the enemy from dodging for a couple of seconds unless they attack you. So this is perfect for PvP, for example, if someone's maybe trying to run away and you want to slow them down, it's a good way to catch up to them. This is a perfect perk for that, or a Heartrune for that. So I'm excited to see how we can implement that into PvP and maybe switch up the meta a little bit. Who knows? Something else that they are adding, or what they call chase rewards, quote unquote. They have basically, it's an item that has an extremely low drop rate. I think it's like 0.5% is what they mentioned. But these items can be obtained from each raid boss for the Nighthaven raid coming out. And these items include, I guess the first boss drops a really cool hat. And we'll see how cool it is. Multiple bosses in the raid will be dropping mounts. One that they had mentioned is a spectral horse, which sounds really cool. One they did not disclose because of how cool it was, and they really want us to find out on our own. So all the more reason to find it. Now, the cool thing about these items is these are BOE, meaning that you can, if you were able to win whatever that item is, that you can sell it, trade it, etc. So I do think, I personally have always been a fan of this. It reminds me kind of like the black market more or less for WoW, but not so much. Just obviously they're more like vanity items, but you know what I'm trying to say. I do think that adding these items in the games adds in like more of a fun element to New World. Attribute changes. Now, the attribute overhaul, I actually think is probably one of the better changes they are doing to New World, and I really think it's going to be an overall game changer, quite literally, for just how the balancing works with our characters. So Josh Hurley, the combat game director, went in depth with how they're doing this attribute overhaul, but essentially what they're doing is they're just trying to make it so it's a little bit more balanced. And the sheer amount of attribute points I think you can get right now, I think he said was like 730 or something like that, and which allows you to be able to split through so many different attributes to get those certain points, to get those perks. And they're reducing it down to like 530, so they're actually taking a good chunk away from that. And even though it kind of reduces where you can put a lot of these points, it, with all the changes they're making to the balancing of the game with the weapons, the armor, and the perks and things like that, I do think it kind of streamlines it just a little bit more to kind of fit in line with what they're trying to do with this overhaul, if that makes sense. So it really kind of reduces the ability to kind of, like I think you mentioned, to do like a really heavy, like, you know, 200 strength, 300 con build where you're really tanky, but you're also doing a good amount of damage. And I think that now you have to make more of that choice, if you will, of how you want to build your character. But to mitigate a lot of the detriment to these changes they're making, they have adjusted the damage scaling to balance out these builds. And from my understanding, it's kind of like if a weapon, like, I don't know, like a great axe, let's just say, I think it's just only strength, right? So if it's a great axe with only strength, it'll now scale with strength and something else. So whatever two attributes you're trying to go with, it'll still scale with the weapon a lot better. Again, it kind of just fits better within the system. One last thing to kind of touch on gear and the streamlining and things like that, and perk adjustments. I know we kind of talked about perks earlier, the perk charms. One example they were talking about that they fixed, and this was just a big pain point, was something like Hearty. And when I mentioned before about, you know, what they're trying to do is basically remove the things where if you don't have that one perk on this item, everything else is obsolete. And I do think Hearty was in fact one of those perks. If you didn't have Hearty on a ring, it was just cooked, because you essentially got one less dodge roll, which means one less iframe. And for PvP, and to get rid of this whole, like, if it's not on the item, it's completely irrelevant, I personally, again, can't stand it. And so what they're doing is they're actually deprecating Hearty completely and replacing it with some stam changes, so that light and medium players still get those 3 rolls, where heavy still gets 2, obviously. But again, I think it's just a healthier way of going about this throughout the game. To kind of wrap things up, I hope I was able to share with you guys some of the things that I'm most excited about, give you guys my thoughts on it. New World Season 10 has a lot of promising things that they're bringing to the game. Again, on launch, we'll see how things unfold, but overall, this year, I will say that New World has been moving more in a positive direction. And just to reiterate, I am really, honestly, I was a little bit blown away, if I'm being completely honest with you guys, with how much positive feedback New World's been getting. And to see the sheer amount of people that are saying, man, I played New World at launch, obviously it wasn't the greatest, I'm making a comeback for season 10. Or, you know, somebody like me who has kind of played here and there over the years. And obviously I've been through the best of times in New World and the worst of times in New World. And to see this just level of refreshment from the player base and from the developers, and just how transparent they've been with a lot of these things, I really think it's kind of turning a new leaf in many ways. And I'm very hopeful that it will finally give New World the recognition that I believe the game deserves. So again, I'm going to be in season 10 and I'm very excited to try it out. I hope you guys are excited to try it out. And if you want a game, man, hit me up anytime. Come by the stream Tuesday, Thursday evenings. Try to stream on the weekends when season 10 comes out, and we'll get it popping. So, of course, if you guys enjoyed the video, make sure to do the YouTube thing, man. Like, subscribe, comment. That really helps me out. I greatly appreciate it. Again, if you guys want to come by the stream and hang out with your boy, man, twitch.tv/Reverie. Come through, hang out. If you guys are trying to game, I'm looking to play my West character. I main West, but maybe making an East character as well. So, hopefully we'll be on both. That's it for me. I'll see you guys in the next video. 07.